Alright, we are finally here for part 2 of the Tokyo Ghoul manga cover ranking. This list will cover both the original series and which I should have done from the beginning. However, now I get a second video out of it. But for whatever reason, since about December of 2023, the view count on the original video has climbed up for it to be my most popular video by a wide margin. So anyone that did watch, liked, subscribed, or anything related to that video, it really does mean a lot. So, without further ado, let's get to the first entry. Unfortunately, we do have to have one cover sit at the bottom. It just so happens to be the same one as the original video. Now there's an interesting perspective thing going on with Tsukiyama and the way he's sitting, but out of all 30 covers, this was the last one to catch my eye. Something about it seems a little bit off, and it's just a little bit less attractive than the rest in terms of which one do I want to grab. Our not last award winner goes to volume 12 of All around, it's a fine cover, but there isn't really any reason for this cover to stand out above a lot of the other ones. The reason that it does get the edge is because of the different colored eyes on Psycho. Making use of a lot of the space on the cover was nice to see as well, as opposed to only taking up about a third of it. Next up is a volume that I had ranked slightly higher in the previous video. Technically, it was third from the bottom last time, and here it is again. So what do I mean by slightly? I have no clue. I wrote this months ago. Toka definitely has an interesting pose that you don't see drawn every day, but I think the colors are just a little too basic to catch my eye. I consider all of these covers to be at the very least good, so it's really hard sometimes to find these very small nitpicks. It seems we have a massive drop-off from the placement on the last list. Originally at number 6 last time, the cover from the OG series featuring Juzo now sits at the 4th worst in quotations, of the combined list. I think the art continuing over the pages rather than the spine, even though it was praised previously, has now become the reason I felt it a little off-putting. Even though it was a drop, this cover still looks like fun when I pick it up. I swear I don't have anything against Juzo, but this cover does leave a lot to be desired. I like the colors, but it just has a similar vibe to the cover with Psycho. The muted colors provide an interesting look with just slight glimpses of red, but the face and emotion just don't really grip me like the covers later on the list do. I think I was a little too harsh in the previous video, because no way this cover deserved to be named the second worst of the OG series. Looking at the incredible gradient of color and the butterfly wings created around Hinami, it's hard to not like this cover's incredible artwork. So if I thought that this cover was great, why is it still so low on the list? The artwork is just small. I feel like if it took up more space, we would have definitely been talking about it later. But unfortunately, it sits at number 25. This is an example of a better use of the space than the last cover, but it takes a more minimalistic approach. Arima's glasses having a little bit of a bloodstain on them, and being the only color other than black and white, was a very stylistic approach to a cover that you don't see a lot outside of this series. I do think some of the smaller details are overshadowed by the sheer lack of color. With a slightly different color for the background, I think the artwork would have really popped, benefited, and gotten a higher rank. I promise I didn't do this on purpose, but it is weird now that both of the covers featuring Juzo were back-to-back, and now both of the covers featuring Arima are back-to-back. This is more along the lines of what I meant when I wanted a different color background, and while I think black may not have been the best choice for everything to pop out, it definitely works more than the white does. Along with that, the details are a little more refined, and overall the artwork looks a lot cleaner and makes Arima look more menacing than he did previously. Kichimura Washu, otherwise known as Nimura Furuta, appears front and center on this cover, but there's something about his design that's just not really appealing to me. I do happen to like the orange colors that are present in the background, but I just can't really say that this cover is anything special compared to many others. It's not that I don't like him as a character. I think almost every character in this story gets their time to shine, but this cover and the art just didn't grab me like many others did. I get a very similar vibe from this cover as I did the last one. Aside from Tsukiyama now taking center cover, the background is now pink instead of orange, which I do like better, thus putting it at number 21. I'm going to start off by saying I'm not really a fan of the plain yellow background. I think it's too bright and it really washes out Aki Aramoto and her light pink colors. However, the back of the cover does fit pretty well with the darker colors of Kotaro Amon, and if not for his inclusion, I think this would have landed a lot lower on this list. Let's not waste any time, as this cover is incredibly similar to the last one. Maybe because they're back to back in the series, but who knows for sure? I definitely don't. Either way, while I would say I like Naki more than I used to, I like him just a little bit less than Akira and especially Amon. However, the orange color is a lot more bearable to look at, and Naki and his bodyguards stand out with their black, white, and gray colors, giving it the edge over this previous entry. Gray as a color is usually seen as boring. And while this cover isn't the most exciting, it does have a decent amount going for it. After so much time without a cover, Hide was bound to get one, and having it be after his return to the story was an incredible choice. The only color other than the grayscale tones being on the headphones, which also draws attention to the mask he's forced to wear, is overall a good choice on character and framing. But the dark colors do start to get a bit muddy, causing just a bit of messiness. I really like how the illustration takes up most of the cover, and I think my favorite part are the blemishes of pink throughout and on Rize's lips. It adds just enough color to give it an eye-catching aspect that outweighs the bland background. Now, a little later on this list, I'm gonna sound like a hypocrite because I'm putting a white background as a negative here, but I think you'll understand when I bring it up later. Purple is one of my favorite colors, so of course there's a huge bias involved with this one. On the surface, Rize holding Kaneki seems like a sweet visual, but it is truly haunting to know the story between the two throughout the whole series. Aside from that, this cover's unique art bleeding onto the back in one continuous piece is very appealing. As opposed to the covers like the ones featuring Akira and Naki, the other characters just feel more like separate entities rather than an incorporation like Kaneki is in this cover. This cover has always been interesting to me, more than any other. I think it's because the art gives the best sense of texture to the cover, and when looking at it, it seems as though Yuta's hair has a stitched, almost quilt-like design. Aside from a little bit of the nerdy art talk, some of the slightly less nerdy highlights include the flower design on Yuta's clothes and a good use of dark background. The flowers add a nice amount of color to the relatively dark cover, and it really stands out among the covers from the original series. This cover is one that I go back and forth on a lot. This cover is Kaneki's return to covers and to the story, and while I really enjoy his character, I'm sure the bias for him is affecting me in this ranking. I'd talk about this cover more, but it's just an inferior version of another cover that's gonna appear later on this list. I do like that this cover parallels that one though, but like I said, we're gonna talk about that one later. Going back to entry number 15, this cover has another good use of a dark background, but I think this one works better for a different reason. In entry 15, the dark colors were the main focus with accents of bright colors. However, they flip roles this time around to force our focus to Kaneki's soft, melancholic expression. You can really see absolute sadness in the straight mouth and his heavy eye. It's also telling that his hair is covering his ghoul eye, showing him as completely human in a moment of weakness. Now at this point, I've been able to find more things to talk about than general color and composition talk, and while that's not necessarily going to apply to all entries from here on out, expect a bit more of a deep dive into this upper section of the covers. So this is where I'm gonna be a bit of a hypocrite. In the discussion on Ri's Volume 15, I implied that there was a cover that utilized a white background to a much greater success. The final volume, not only of Ri, but the entire series, uses this white negative space to focus on Kaneki and his character art. This also makes it a parallel cover to the final volume of the original series in more ways than one. This cover depicts Kaneki with both hair and hand covering his ghoul eye, but it's the differences that push this cover above the previous entry. Instead of an aura of sadness expressed through the black background, this volume uses white to express hope and a positive outlook. Along with Kaneki cracking a slight smile with a wide open eye, this cover is more hopeful, which is fitting for the end of the series. Also, I like that it shows his eye patch not being worn, signifying that ghouls can now live among humans. This cover radiates comfort, and I think that has to do with the lighter pastel colors that occupy these first two covers of Ri. I also like the mirror that these first two covers of Ri have with the original series, technically featuring the same characters. We'll talk about the other ones later, but for now, the blue shade that Toka's hair takes on contrasts with the dark purple from the OG cover. This, along with the light smile, create a more inviting environment versus the more distant environment that was created by the original cover. As I was writing, this cover was originally placed way lower than its current position, but I don't see why it shouldn't be where it is now. Remember how I said I love purple? Well, it shouldn't shock anyone to see the cover with the most purple this high on the list. Although it is more of an indigo color, it's close enough to purple that most people wouldn't bat an eye if I said that. Regardless, there's not a lot to talk about in terms of character, aside from the duality seen in the color and style of Ayato and Toka. While Ayato is depicted in the usual cover style, Toka is more flat and obviously in the background. Also, Ayato is shown in his usual color scheme, and Toka is just two colors, white and pink. These two aspects show me that the two are related due to pink and purple colors usually being grouped together, but due to the difference in color and style. It shows how different this pair of siblings is. The back of this cover isn't too much to talk about, just Noro, Tatara, and who we later learn is Eito Yoshimura, the one-eyed owl. Their pink outfits, just like Toka on the front, are very visually appealing against the indigo and purple background. This is just a case of aesthetics really overpowering everything, and that's perfectly alright when it comes to art. The very first cover. It's iconic for being the first, but it's not the only reason it finds itself up here on the list. To start with, I absolutely love the art style for this cover, and it's clear to see the brushstrokes that really allows the lighting to stand out. Speaking of the lighting, the choice of the blue tones sets up the reader for the tragic story that is yet to unfold. Even before you open the first page, there's a sense of sadness instilled, and it still doesn't prepare you for what's about to happen. Now, I haven't mentioned the eye yet, but it being the only red color, contrasting with the rest of Kaneki, is brilliant. Even though blue and red aren't opposites on the color wheel, they're usually seen as such. Look at the Jedi and the Sith in Star Wars. Almost every video game that has multiplayer teams separates them into red and blue, but this manga cover does things a little different. The red eye is paired with the tragic blue lighting, so that later, the reader can understand that this eye and Kaneki's tragic life are one and the same, at least for now. Two more small things to mention is that the eye patch on the back cover is a really nice touch. And it may just be me, but it seems like Kaneki's clothes are more detailed than anything else on this cover. I'm going to start off by saying, I don't remember liking Kuki Urie all that much after finishing the anime. I can't remember if his gag didn't translate well, or just a general lack of looking for character nuances, but the manga reading allowed me to see deeper into his character and appreciate him more. The first thing I want to point out is the tape covering his mouth in the shape of an X, showing us how he's been silenced by the CCG about telling the truth. It's also a symbol for how Urie is willing to sacrifice anything to become stronger, as he himself put himself in the situation to be silenced. The other thing I want to point out is how this cover of Urie is a foil to most of Kaneki's covers, specifically the original's Volume 14 and Ri's Volume 16. In those covers, I mentioned how Kaneki has his ghoul eye covered and his mouth displays his emotions clearly. Obviously, we've talked about how we can't even see Urie's mouth, and on top of that, his hair covers his human eye, leaving the ghoul eye exposed. Although it's not engaged, it shows us how Urie is even willing to sacrifice his own humanity in the pursuit of strength. I'm gonna be honest, I think I overrated this one a bit during the first ranking video. Which, if you haven't seen that one, it's interesting to compare my thoughts then to the ones I have now. And while I think this cover is still good, there was no criteria for that video. It sounds weird to say considering both of these videos are my opinions, but I'm a lot happier with how this list turned out. This cover shows an anguished Kaneki, and it came at a time where he was about to hit rock bottom. It shows us how, regardless of how he tries to play it off, Kaneki is fighting himself on the inside and struggling to keep himself calm and connected. Even the red Kagune-like form breaking and snapping is like his psyche, foreshadowing his transformation into a centipede and eventually being forced to stop his pursuit of Aogiri. It feels like I should have more to say with this being higher, but it's just another case of aesthetics really putting it above a lot of others in the top 10. This is another cover that's just pleasing to look at. I think this is a great example of color being both separate and part of the whole picture. You can clearly see the reds are different from the white, and so on with the rest of the colors, but they also come together to create a full picture. There's almost an abstract quality to the art that really captures my attention. I also see this cover as a parallel to Volume 5 of the original series. Instead of Kaneki and Rize, this cover features Heisei Sasaki and Eito Yoshimura. Along with that, Heisei is in the foreground, appearing to be held and manipulated by Eito from behind, rather than Rize being up front and holding an unconscious Kaneki. The quality of this art just really brings it up this much higher than its parallel, but just shy of the top 5. This cover is so incredibly unique, but there's one part of this piece that reminds me of one earlier on the list. The wing right off Mutsuki's left shoulder looks close, but different to the wings on Hinami from Volume 3 of the original series. I bring this up because this art shows us Mutsuki after she's snapped and accepted herself as both a woman and a ghoul, which comes from love, admiration, and trauma. The bare skin on the shoulders and arms, along with the smiling expression, displays a sense of freedom, but the red patch around the right side of her face and eye shows that this newfound freedom comes from a place of darkness. After being the most reserved and timid of the Quink squad, it's haunting to see Toru Mutsuki go, and pardon my French here, absolutely batshit insane. Brilliant depiction of this negative spiral in one image. These next two are going to be a little bit lacking on words, only because I feel like there's less of a reason to explain my thoughts on them. Regardless, this cover actually freaks me out, especially when I first saw it. When pushed into a corner, Takizawa was able to stand his ground and put his life on the line, even though his last thought to write down was, "I don't want to die." The reveal on that panel still remains a shock and a terrifying event to read through, at least for me. To have this cover show what Takizawa was forced to become after he sacrificed his life, it's torture to look at. The way it affects me looking at it, I just have to put it up near the top. Kotaro Amon looks like an absolute badass in this cover. I love the almost sketch-like design of him, and it really shows that he's a fighter and he's gonna stand up for what he believes in. His facial expression tells me all that by his confident look and a gape mouth screaming a battle cry. This cover is also another exception to my general distaste for plain backgrounds. Obviously I have character biases, and Kotaro Amon is one of my favorites, but that's not entirely the reason. There's something else I can't explain, so much so that when I initially went through the ranking process, I had this around the number 10 spot. I took a second look and asked myself, why isn't this one higher? And I just kept moving it up, and now it's the third best in my opinion. But there's two more to go. Let's see who takes the runner-up spot. While it's not as badass as Kotaro Amon's cover, or as character defining as many of these other covers we've seen, especially in the upper half of the list, I can't help but enjoy this one more than the 28 others that have appeared before. This is going to be the most egregious use of my character biases, but I absolutely love Heisei Sasaki. I like Kaneki more as a character, but if we're talking specifically design-wise, I enjoy Heisei's design a lot more. It might be because of the two-toned hair, but I think it's because he shows off a part of Kaneki's personality that wasn't able to shine much in the latter half of the original series. The aspect of being a caretaker. He gets to mentor and care for the Quink squad, and I believe subconsciously trying to save them from having to go down the same path that Kaneki did. Heisei's struggle to find himself, an eventual desire to find out more about his past as Ken Kaneki, and his decision to relinquish control to Kaneki is beautifully done. I also mentioned way back when we talked about Re Volume 2 that the first two covers of each series feature the same characters. Now, because I said technically, Kaneki's on the first cover and Heisei's on the first cover of Re. Because they're technically the same person, it counts. Now that my character diagnosis is over, we're going to talk a little bit about the art itself. Heisei just gives off the vibe of a mentor you can ask any question to, and he'll try his best to help. Also, glasses, they're pretty cool. I don't really know what's going on with the background, but it's neat. Apologies if the art talk is lacking, but Heisei is such a cool character to me that along with this sense of comfort, I had to put it up at number 2. There's still one cover to go though, and we all know by now what has to be there. This cover is possibly the most iconic of the series, and that makes it the hardest to talk about, because there's no way to do it justice. It always makes number 1 picks on lists so hard, Every box set and image of this series usually uses this cover art, and I think that says more than I ever could. What I can talk about is the comment I made back when talking about Ri's Volume 7. This cover and that one are virtually the same. They both feature Kaneki after a breakthrough in his mental state with a red background and his one ghoul eye glowing red. The reason the version from Ri is inferior to me is that Kaneki has his mask around his neck in the original series version, and his smirk is a more interesting facial expression. One other thing that's more preference in my part is that the art style of this cover with the easily visible brush strokes is much more appealing. I don't want to make it seem like it's just a comparison to the other cover, but more as the reasons why it also deserves its spot on top of the list. And while I feel like I had less to say about this cover than the last one, it couldn't be anywhere but number 1. Overall, this list allowed me to learn more about dissecting art and characters, and I mostly did that as I went. You might notice the later half of the list has me talking about the covers a lot more, and while I think it's natural to talk about things you like more than things you don't like as much, I think my writing ability and style evolved just through the writing of this script. And I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to hit this breakthrough. Without the blow-up the first video had last winter, that would be 2 winters ago now, I probably wouldn't have made this list. But I don't regret it now. Now, keep in mind, this list is my opinion, and I don't have a background in art, and you may not agree with me. If that's the case, talk about your favorite colors in the comments. And with that, I hope to see you all next time.